The silence in the grand conclave chamber was not peaceful. It was the heavy, cold silence of a verdict being delivered. The air shimmered with projected star maps and the faint, sweet ozone scent of alien technologies. At the circular podium in the center, the Crethern envoy stood, a being of polished, dark chitin and shifting bands of blue light where a face might be. It was tall, its phone radiating a sense of absolute, unassailable power dot the periphery of the great circle. At a console that seemed small and hastily installed sat the human delegation. Ambassador Hana, an old woman with sharp eyes and hair the color of steel, watched the Crethern with a face like stone. Beside her, Jin, the communications officer, felt his palms sweating. He was young for this post, and the sheer scale of the council members, the gaseous Vellum. The crystalline Thakar, the many-limbed os made him feel microscopic. The Crethern's voice, when it came, was a vibration that bypassed the ears and spoke directly into the mind. It was clean, logical, and utterly without warmth. The expansion of the human coalescence is a statistical anomaly. Your rate of growth is illogical. Your biological imperative to adapt and spread is a destabilizing vector in the orderly galactic ecosystem. Your very nature is a threat. Jin's heart hammered against his ribs. They had known this was coming, of course. The Crethern had been posturing for months, moving fleets to the edges of human-explored space. But to hear the words in this hall, under the dispassionate gaze of the galaxy's elders, was different. Therefore, the Crethern envoy continued, a limb gesturing to a star map that highlighted human colonies in angry red. The Crethern unity, by right of strength and the mandate of order, declares a state of war upon the human coalescence. You will surrender your strategic colonies, Lyton Star, Proxima Centauri b, the Tau Ceti cluster, immediately. You will submit to Crethern governance and accept biological limits on your population growth. Your response is required within one standard galactic cycle. The ultimatum hung in the air. A murmur, like wind through distant trees, passed through the other council members. No one spoke in humanity's defense. To the Vellum, a conflict that lasted less than a century was a fleeting squabble. To the Thakar, biological species were fascinating but transient. Humanity was a lone dot ambassador. Hannah stood. She was small, especially next to the holographic projection of the Crethern envoy, but she drew every sensor in the room. Her voice was clear, aged but unwavering, and she used the old-fashioned vocal speakers, letting the translators handle her words. "This is a mistake," she said, each word precise. "You judge us by our brief time among the stars. You see our adaptability as chaos. You see our growth as greed. You are wrong." The Crethern's light patterns flickered, a sign of dismissive amusement. "Your subjective perspective is noted, but irrelevant. The logic is clear. You are a young, aggressive species. You must be pruned before your disorder infects others." Hannah did not raise her voice. "We have offered treaties. We have shared our science of environmental restoration. We have asked only for the chance to grow alongside you. Your answer is eradication." "Control," the Crethern corrected. "Order. The galaxy has a balance, human. You are an imbalance. Your choice is simple. Surrender or be simplified." Jin felt a surge of hot anger, pushing aside some of the fear. Simplified. A clean, horrible word for annihilation. He looked at the other alien faces, seeking any hint of sympathy, finding only curiosity or indifference. Hannah stared at the Crethern envoy for a long moment. Then she nodded, just once, a small, final motion. "Then you have made your choice. Do not say we did not warn you." She sat down, her posture straight. A wave of new murmurs circulated. The Crethern's lights pulsed with triumph. The human ambassador's defiance was, to them, the last sputter of a candle before it went out. The council president, a swirling vortex of the Velm, announced the session concluded. The matter, in the eyes of the galaxy, was settled. As the shimmering forms of the alien delegates began to fade from their projectors, Jin's console chimed with a priority alert. It was a direct, heavily encrypted data burst from human command, routed through a maze of hidden relays. His fingers flew over the interface, authorization codes flashing. The decryption key was his own biometrics, a retinal scan and a heartbeat pattern. The message that unfolded on his screen was not the lengthy strategic briefing he expected. It was stark. It was simple. It was a single line of text in plain, unadorned standard English. No coordinates, no attack orders, no defensive protocols. Just the words. You declared war now. We'll show you why that was a blunder. Below the text was an attached file. Not a weapon schematic or a fleet movement plan. It was a transmission protocol, a hyperwave broadcast template of a design Jin had never seen before. It was bizarre, inefficient looking, using harmonic frequencies most species considered useless for communication. It was, the notes indicated, designed to do one thing: bypass all standard filtering and firewalls, and embed itself directly into the most basic signal processing layers of any known technology. Jin's mouth went dry. He understood. This wasn't a communication to be hidden. This was a message to be shouted. He looked up, his eyes wide, seeking Hana's. The old ambassador was watching him, her expression unreadable. She had known it was coming. She saw the question on his face. "Send it, Jin," she said, her voice so low only he could hear it over the din of the departing council. On every frequency. Broad-spectrum hyperwave. Use the protocol. No encryption. No point of origin masking. Let it echo. "Ma'am," Jin whispered, his throat tight. "They'll trace it. They'll know it's from us. It's a taunt. It will make them furious." A ghost of a smile touched Hannah's lips. It was not a pleasant smile. Good. Let them be furious. Let them hear the words. Now, execute the order. His training took over. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but beneath it was a new electric feeling. This was not surrender. This was not hiding. This was something else entirely. His fingers moved across the console, initiating the sequence. He fed the simple, devastating line of text into the strange protocol. He set the broadcast parameters. All frequencies, maximum gain, repeat cycle continuous. A progress bar filled on his screen. With a final tap, he sent it in the silence of the now empty human console. There was no grate. The Crethern flagship, World Sunderer, hung in the void like a black blade. Inside, the air was still and scentless, a perfect environment for pure logic. On the command platform, Commander Gorv reviewed the fleet formations on the main hologram. Hundreds of ships, each a masterpiece of clean, lethal design, moved in flawless synchrony. The human colony on the fourth planet of System L-19, a place they called New Hope, was a bright, mocking dot on the display. It would be the first. A soft chime sounded. Gorv's second in command, a Crethern named Velar, approached. "Commander, the human signal persists. All attempts at full purge have failed. It resides in low-priority communication buffers, in entertainment system caches. It is a minor irritant." Gorv did not turn. The human message was a childish act of defiance, nothing more. It was noise. Ignore it. It is a distraction, an attempt to provoke an emotional response. We are above such primitive tactics. The fleet is ready. Attack sequence is primed. Human orbital defenses are minimal. Projection. Colony pacification in 4.3 cycles. Proceed, Gorv said. Yet. As he gave the order, A flicker of the message scrolled past on a secondary monitor, automatically translated into Crethern script. Why, that was a blunder. The words were illogical. A blunder was a mistake born of faulty data. The data on humanity was clear. They were weak, disorganized, new. Declaring war was not a mistake. It was a necessary pruning of the galactic tree. Gorv dismissed the thought. It was the signal, trying to seed doubt. He would purge it from his own mind, as he would purge the humans from this system. Far away, hidden in the thick, rocky belt of asteroids that circled a dull red star, was listening post-theta. From the outside, it was just another jagged rock. Inside, it was a snug capsule of warm light, humming computers, and the faint smell of recycled air and coffee.min stretched in her chair, her eyes tired from staring at screens. She was an AI systems engineer, not a soldier. Her job was to watch, to listen, to understand. Right now, her main screen was a chaos of data. It wasn't military traffic she was monitoring. It was everything else. One window showed Crethern public news feeds. Another displayed entertainment channels, strange, rhythmic dramas and complex logic puzzles that passed for Crethern comedy. A third tracked internal ship communications, the mundane chatter of a vast fleet. The meme is propagating, Min. The voice came from the speakers, calm and smooth. It was Bora, the post's AI, her personality matrix designed for collaboration. Show me the saturation levels, Min said, sipping her lukewarm coffee. A graph overlay appeared on the main display. A green line, representing the reach of the final message, was climbing steadily. It was not just being received. It was being processed. Crethern systems, in trying to analyze and categorize the strange signal, were unpacking it. And buried within the simple text, wrapped in the unique harmonic carrier wave, was a payload. It's not a virus, Min muttered, more to herself than to Bora. It's a seed, yes, Bora agreed. A cultural seed. A carrier wave acts as a sympathetic resonator. It attaches itself to narrative and emotional data packets within their networks. On a feed labeled Crethern Youth Discourse Forum, a new thread appeared. The title, translated, read, Analysis of the Human Assertion of Blunder. The post was full of standard Crethern tactical analysis, but the very act of discussing it, of turning it over, was new. They were engaging with the idea, not just deleting it. A different feed, a popular music channel, played a new song. The rigid mathematical harmony of Crethern music was there, but underneath it was a faint, repeating pattern, a three-note motif pulled directly from the harmonic signature of the human broadcast. It was a sound of dissonance. Of defiance. Min zoomed in on the communications from a Crethern mid-level ship, the Star Cleaver. The captain was sending a routine readiness report, but the language was slightly off. He used a word that translated to ill-advised instead of the more common tactically suboptimal when referring to a drill. The influence was subtle, like a dye spreading in water. They have no immune system for this, Min said, a spark of grim understanding in her eyes. They purged their own history of rebellion, of doubt, of creative chaos centuries ago. Their society is a perfect, sterile engine. We just introduced a new idea. And ideas are replicators, or finished. More effective than any virus. A virus attacks the body. An idea attacks the mind. Aboard the World Sunderer, Junior Logistics Officer Day went about his duties. His mind was a busy, ordered place, focused on the flow of supplies, energy cells for pulse cannons, nutrient paste for the crew, spare parts for gravity generators. He was good at his job. He found comfort in the numbers, in the predictability. A soft ping came from his personal data slate. It was an automated summary from the ship's cultural integrator, a system designed to analyze foreign transmissions. The summary was about the human signal. The system had dissected it. Along with the translation, it had provided contextual notes in an attempt to explain the human psychology behind the words. They almost deleted it. It was irrelevant. But a small notation caught his eye. Associated narrative archetypes, the underdog, the last stand, the moral victory. These were not Crethern concepts. Victory was victory, achieved through superior force. The underdog was simply the weaker participant, destined to be removed. Curiosity, a faint and rarely used impulse, flickered in day. He commanded the system to elaborate. A story unfolded on his slate. It was not a human story directly, but the Crethern Ayas reconstruction of the type of story the message referenced. It described a small, outnumbered force holding a narrow pass against a vast empire, not to win a war, but to prove a point. It described a single voice speaking truth to overwhelming power. The logic was flawed. The tactics were terrible. The outcome was inevitable failure. And yet, Day felt a strange, uncomfortable stirring in his thought processes. The story was inefficient. It was wasteful. But it contained a quality, a sense of something beyond pure material victory. He looked around the sleek, silent logistics center. Everything here was about the efficient application of force to achieve a predetermined end. There was no room for a last stand. There was only success or failure. He closed the file. It was disorderly thinking. He tried to purge it, to focus on the inventory report for the upcoming assault. But the idea, now planted, would not be deleted as easily as a data packet. It sat in his mind, a small, quiet, and utterly alien question. Back on the bridge of the World Sunderer, Gorv watched as the fleet entered its final approach vector. The blue-green marble of New Hope filled the view screen. "Open a channel to the colony," he commanded. "Broadcast the surrender demand." Standard template. The comms officer nodded. "Channel open, Commander." Gorv prepared to speak, to deliver the cool, logical words of conquest. But as the audio link activated, another sound leaped through first, just for a fraction of a second. It was a snippet of audio from the planet's public broadcasts. It was human music. Wild, unpredictable, full of conflicting emotions and raw energy. It was the sound of chaos. It was cut off instantly, replaced by the clear, sterile frequency of the Crethern hail. But in that tiny moment, Gorv had heard it. He had heard the thing they were there to simplify. It was not the sound of fear or submission. It was the sound of life, messy and defiant. For the first time, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced Gorv's certainty. This was not just a military operation anymore. They were not just fighting ships and soldiers. They were trying to silence a noise. And the noise, he was beginning to fear, was everywhere. The silence aboard the Crethern ship Star Cleaver was different now. It wasn't the quiet of efficiency. It was a tense, listening silence. On the bridge, Captain Rand watched the tactical display. The World Sunderer and the main fleet were a cluster of bright icons, poised to strike the human colony. His own ship, a nimble cruiser, was tasked with flank security, scanning the empty space near the system's asteroid belt. A soft chime announced an incoming fleet-wide communique from Commander Gorv. It was the final attack order, crisp and clear. Yet, as the message played, Rand noticed a faint, almost subliminal harmonic hum underlying the audio ghost of the human broadcast frequency. The ship's systems had tried to filter it, but it was baked into the data stream now, a persistent whisper. All vessels, advance to primary targets. Suppress orbital defenses. Maximum efficiency. Gorv's voice was calm, but to Rand it sounded different. It sounded brittle. His weapons officer, a young Crethern named Tay, spoke up. "Captain, targeting solutions are locked. But the human defensive satellites..." Their firing patterns in the simulation are erratic. They do not conform to optimal defense models. Rand examined the data. The human satellites were not forming a coordinated net. Some were moving in what seemed like random patterns. Others were broadcasting on wide frequencies, not just targeting data, but other things, fragments of audio, bursts of old radio signals, even what appeared to be laughter. It is a tactic to confuse our predictive algorithms, Rand said, trying to sound sure. Ignore the noise. Fire on the primary power signatures. Yes, Captain. But as Tay's fingers hovered over the firing controls, another voice crackled over a secondary channel. It was from a different Crethan ship, the Swift Vengeance. The officer sounded unsure, a rare and alarming thing. Command, this is Swift Vengeance. We are detecting anomalous energy readings from the colony's surface. It does not match weapons or shield signatures. It is patterned, like a broadcast. Rand felt a cold ripple in his logic centers. A broadcast, not a weapon. They were still broadcasting GOT in a dimly lit analysis room on a hidden human station. Sue leaned close to her monitor. The xenopsychologist's eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but they burned with fierce intensity. On her screen was not a battle map, but a web of connections drawn from millions of intercepted Crethan data packets. One node showed social forum activity spiking around concepts like illogical, sacrifice, and symbolic resistance. Another node tracked subtle changes in language use in Crethan officer logs, a slight increase in conditional phrases, a decrease in absolute statements. A third node pulsed with the propagation of the harmonic meme itself, showing it had now woven itself into the diagnostic subroutines of half the Crethan fleet. Her assistant, a young man named June, brought her a cup of tea. It's working, isn't it? They're starting to doubt. Sue took the cup, nodding slowly. It is more than doubt, June. They are experiencing narrative contamination. Their entire worldview is a single, rigid story. Strength brings order. Order is truth. Anything else is chaos to be eliminated. We have not given them a new story. We have given them the tools to question their own. She pulled up a specific intercept. It was a private message between two mid-level Crethan engineers. They were supposed to be discussing reactor output, but the conversation had drifted. Engineer 1. The efficiency of the human colony's solar grid is surprisingly high, given their technological tier. Engineer 2. Illogical. Their designs are erratic. They should not function this well. Engineer 1. Perhaps our models of erratic are incomplete. The human message, the concept of a blunder, implies a miscalculation of context, not just of force. Engineer 2. Do not analyze the propaganda. It is a tool to weaken resolve. Engineer 1. But what if the tool reveals a weakness in the hand that holds it? The conversation ended there. But the seed was planted. Sue pointed at the screen. See? He is not convinced by our message. He is using the idea of our message to examine his own side. He is doing what they never do. He is critiquing from within. June looked astonished. We're making them creative? We are making them unstable, Sue corrected gently. Their unity was their strength. It was a wall with no cracks. We did not hit the wall with a hammer. We dropped a single tiny seed into the mortar. And now it is growing. Back on the Star Cleaver, Captain Rand received a direct order from the World Sunderer. Flank element Star Cleaver. Detach and sweep Sector 7 for potential hidden assets. Human tactic profiles suggest a possibility of guerrilla deployments. It was a standard, precautionary order. But as Rand acknowledged it, he looked at the designated sector on his map. It was empty space, far from the main battle. It was a logical move to ensure security. but a fragment of the human story he had unconsciously absorbed. The tale of the underdog using misdirection flared in his mind. Was this a logical precaution? Or was he being moved away from the main fight because Command was starting to see threats in every shadow? Was there certainty cracking? "Helm, set course for Sector 7, he ordered, his voice flat. The ship turned, gliding away from the bright cluster of the fleet. The silence on the bridge deepened. Weapons Officer Tay finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper on their private channel. "Captain, the human colony's broadcasts. I have been analyzing the nonverbal layers. There is no fear in the acoustic profile. There is anticipation." Rand did not reply. He stared at the starfield ahead. The flawless logic of the Crethern war machine suddenly felt like a fragile shell. And inside, something new and troubling was stirring. On the surface of New Hope, in a bunker deep beneath a mountain, a human signal officer named Yuna watched her panel. The Crethern fleet was on final approach. The sky would soon be full of fire. Her job was not to fire back. Her job was to keep talking. She switched on a planetary-wide channel. She didn't transmit threats or pleas. She began to read. Her voice was calm and clear. And so, against the gathered might of the Empire, the 300 stood in the pass. They knew they would fall. But they also knew that every moment they held, every blow they struck, would become a story. And stories, they understood, are harder to kill than soldiers. It was an ancient tale from a world and a time impossibly distant. She was broadcasting it on the same harmonic frequency as the original message. It was a targeted transmission, aimed not at Crethern military codes, but at their open cultural receivers. In the Crethern flagship, Commander Gorv heard it. It was just a whisper in the background of the bridge's ambient sound, translated by the ship's systems. A story of certain death and futile resistance. It was irrational. It was madness, but the junior officer at the navigation station shifted in his seat. The story contained a concept, the power of a symbol. It was an illogical power, one that had no place in a material universe. Yet the human was speaking of it as if it were a tangible force. Gorv slammed a hand on his console. "I want that signal jammed. Trace its source and destroy it." The weapons officer responded. "The signal is using the anomalous harmonic carrier, Commander. It is bypassing our standard jamming protocols. It is everywhere." The word hung in the air. Everywhere. It was then that the first human defensive batteries opened fire. They did not fire at the lead ships. They fired in complex, interweaving patterns that seemed to paint pictures in the sky with laser light. They fired to obscure, to dazzle, to create confusion. It was not efficient. It was not optimal. It was chaotic, creative, and utterly, profoundly human. As the World Sunderer shuddered from a near miss, Gorv looked at his perfect fleet formation on the screen. For the first time, he saw not invincible order, but a collection of individual ships, each with a crew whose minds might now be whispering with strange, alien questions. The battle had begun, but the true attack, he realized with a dawning and terrible clarity, had already happened. It had happened inside the minds of his people. The blunder was not in declaring war. It was in declaring war on an idea. And ideas do not die when ships explode. The order to fire hung in the sterile air of the World Sunderer's bridge. Commander Gorv gave it with the absolute certainty that had been the bedrock of his life. All primary vessels. Target the orbital defense grid. Annihilate it. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. The silence was a physical weight. Then a voice, tight with confusion, crackled over the fleet-wide channel. It was from the battleship Unbreakable Will. "Command, we request confirmation." The human satellite designated Grid Prime is emitting a non-hostile energy signature. It matches cultural broadcast patterns. Engaging contradicts Protocol 7 Alpha regarding preservation of non-military data sources. Gorv froze. Protocol 7 Alpha was a minor regulation about studying enemy communications. It was never, ever to supersede an attack order during active combat. Before he could roar a correction, another voice broke in, this one from the cruiser Inevitable Dawn. Command. Secondary targets are moving in unpredictable harmonic sequences. Our predictive targeting cannot establish a lock. Is there a new tactical algorithm we have not received? A flicker of the human story about the 300 holding the pass flashed, unwanted, in Gorv's mind. Misdirection? Symbolism? No, this was technology. A trick. Ignore the patterns. He broadcast, his mental voice sharp. Fire on geometric centers. Use area saturation. A handful of ships obeyed. Bolts of brilliant plasma lanced out, vaporizing 2 human satellites. But many others held their fire. The fleet's perfect synchronization, a thing of beauty and terror, was gone. On his tactical display, Gorv saw not a single unified entity, but a collection of individual ships, hesitating, questioning. This is the Starcleaver, a new voice called. Captain ran. His ship was still out on the flank sweep. We are detecting no hidden assets in Sector 7. The space is empty. Requesting new orders. There was a pause. Then Rand added, the human broadcast from the planet continues. They are now telling a story about a small creature that defeats a larger predator by using the predator's own strength against it. It was a report. It was also, Gorv understood with a chill, a critique. Rand was pointing out their wasted motion, their paranoia. He was analyzing the situation through the human narrative lens. Hold your position. Gorv snapped, cutting the channel. He felt a tremor in his lower limbs. A foundation was cracking. He turned to his weapons officer. You, manually target the primary colony command center. Fire now. The officer, a model of Crethern discipline, placed his hands on the console. His fingers tensed, but they did not press the final key. He stared at the visual feed of the colony, a dome city, shimmering under a force field. Inside, he could see the tiny, frantic movements of human vehicles. He saw a public screen flashing with words of defiance in their simple script. He saw life, officer. Gorv's voice was a whip. Commander. The officer's voice was thin. The projected collateral damage. It exceeds acceptable parameters for a first strike engagement against a non-shielded population center. The story they are telling. It is about the value of a single defiant voice. If we erase it, do we not prove their point? Do we not make the story true? Gorv could not believe what he was hearing. A weapons officer concerned with collateral damage and the truth of the story? The cultural seed had taken root in the very heart of his war machine. It was flowering into full-blown mutiny of the mind. At that moment, the human fleet arrived. They did not come from the direction of their core worlds. They emerged from the shadow of the system's gas giant, from dense nebulous clouds, from ballistic trajectories that made no logistical sense. There were not many of them. Their ships were a chaotic mix of designs refitted freighters, old patrol vessels, sleek new fighters built for speed over armor. They looked like a disorderly crowd, not an armada. They did not form a neat battle line. They broke into dozens of small packs, each moving with a wild, independent energy. One group, broadcasting an old human war song full of pounding drums, raced straight toward the Crethern flank, firing every weapon they had in a glorious, useless spray of light. It was a suicidal distraction, and it worked. The Crethern ships on that flank, already confused by the internal dissonance, reacted not as a unified wing, but as individuals. Some turned to meet the charge. Others held back, assessing. 2 smaller frigates actually moved away, seeking clearer tactical space. The flawless formation dissolved into a muddle of separate decisions. Gorv watched in horror as a human freighter, its hull painted with a bizarre, colorful animal logo, rammed a Crethern destroyer's engine nacelle. It was not a tactic. It was an act of pure, desperate will. The destroyer, crippled, spun out of formation. Its crew broadcasting distress signals that were filled with as much shock as pain. Another human pack used their planetary defense lasers not to shoot, but to paint a massive, simplistic picture of a laughing face across the clouds of the gas giant. It was a prank. A cosmic graffiti tag in the middle of a battle. A Crethern logic officer, tasked with analyzing enemy actions, short-circuited for a full second trying to compute its military value. He found none. The absurdity of it broke his analytical process. Fight back. Gorv screamed into the calm, his mental projection laced with a panic he had never felt. Destroy them. They are nothing. They are chaos. But fighting chaos requires flexibility. It requires improvisation. It requires accepting the unpredictable. The Crethern knew only order, procedure, and perfect synchronization. With that broken, they were lost. A human missile, small and cheap, slipped through the gap between 2 Crethern cruisers that were both waiting for the other to take the lead. It struck the World Sunderer's communication array. The damage was minor, but the symbolic blow was immense, static, and through it, the clear, repeating harmonic of the final message, now mixed with the sounds of human music and fragmented, triumphant shouts, flooded the flagship's internal channels. Gorv stumbled back from his console. He looked at his bridge crew. He saw their confusion, their doubt, their individual fears. They were not parts of a machine anymore. They were becoming horribly. Like the humans, a group of separate, thinking, feeling beings, paralyzed by choice. On the surface, Yuna, the signal officer, watched the sky light up with the beautiful, terrifying fireworks of the battle. She saw the Crethern fleet, once a silent blade, now twitching and stumbling like a body having a seizure. She smiled, a tear cutting through the dust on her cheek. She opened her channel again, her voice a gentle whisper over the harmonic carrier wave. You see? She said, not to her fellow humans, but to the universe, to the Crethern listening in. You declared war on a story, and now you're trapped in it. Your Blunder wasn't fighting us. It was thinking the story only had one ending. In the silent, stricken bridge of the World Sunderer, Commander Gorv heard her. He finally understood. The war was over. They had not been outfought. They had been outthought. They had been unraveled by a simple, terrible idea that there are things stronger than force, and victories that look nothing like victory. They had shown the Crethern the blunder, and the blunder was themselves. The silence in the grand conclave chamber was no longer cold. It was thick, heavy with the weight of witnessed impossibility. The crystalline spires seemed to lean in, listening. The same alien delegates were present, but their projections shimmered with a new, unsettled energy. The human console was no longer at the periphery. It had been moved, by unspoken consensus, closer to the center. Ambassador Hana stood, the same woman who had been given an ultimatum. She looked older, the lines on her face deeper, but her eyes were calm. Jin sat beside her, his posture straight, his hands steady on the console. He was not the young officer filled with fear anymore. He had seen the echoes of the message he sent ripple across a galaxy. The Crethern delegation platform was no longer occupied by the towering, imperious envoy of chitin and light. A single figure stood there now. It was Tay, the former logistics officer from the World Sunderer. He looked different. His posture was not one of rigid strength, but of a weary openness. The bands of light on his form pulsed slowly, softly. "It is the will of the Crethern Unity," Tay began, his mental voice quiet but clear, "to formally and completely withdraw our declaration of war against the human coalescence. All fleets are recalled. All claims on human territories are rescinded." A ripple of shock, translated as a chromatic shift in the vellum, and a low hum from the Thakar, went through the chamber. It was unprecedented. The Crethern did not back down. They did not negotiate after a fight. They conquered, or they obliterated. Tay continued, his focus solely on Hana. "The military engagement at System L-19 has been concluded. Our forces have disengaged. We acknowledge disruptions in our command structures and societal cohesion. These were not caused by your weapons, but by your message." Hannah inclined her head slightly. "We accept your withdrawal, and we offer no further hostilities." One of the other delegates, the os with its many limbs waving in agitation, spoke, its voice a series of clicks and whistles. "This is not logical. The Crethern fleet was superior. What happened? Was there a hidden weapon? A technological breakthrough?" Hannah turned to the os. "No, there was only an idea. The Crethern declared war on a people. They did not understand that they were declaring war on the stories those people tell themselves. Stories of resistance. Stories of hope against odds. Stories where the size of the fight in the creature matters more than the size of the creature in the fight." Tay flinched, the translation of the old human phrase striking a chord. He spoke again. "You weaponized your context. You made your chaos infectious. We had no defenses. Our unity was our strength until it became a single point of failure. Your final message was not a final statement. It was a beginning. It began a conversation within our own minds that we cannot stop." He looked out at the gathered species, his light patterns flickering with a painful honesty. "We sought to prune an unstable element. We did not realize we were attacking a mirror. You showed us the rigidity of our own thoughts. You called it a blunder. It was. The blunder was a failure of imagination." The chamber was utterly still. The concept hung in the air, more alien to some of the listeners than any bizarre biology. A war lost not to force, but to a lack of imagination. Hana's voice was firm, but not triumphant. There was no victory in breaking something, even something that sought to break you first. "Do not mistake our restraint for mercy today," she said, her gaze sweeping the council. "We showed you the blunder. We could have shown you the consequence. We could have let your society shatter into 1,000 questioning fragments, leaderless and afraid. We did not. We stand here, offering an end. Remember that. The next species that looks at humanity and sees only a target, remember what we chose not to do, after you showed us what you were willing to do." Her words were a different kind of weapon, a shield forged from moral certainty. The other delegates understood. Humanity had won not just the battle, but the monumental advantage of being the ones who showed mercy. They were unpredictable, not just in their chaos, but in their compassion. The council president moved the session to a close. The matter was settled, but nothing was the same. As the projections began to fade, Tay remained for a moment. He looked at Jin, and then at Hana. He sent a tight, private data packet to their console. On a clean frequency with no harmonics attached, then he vanished. Back in the quiet human embassy quarters, Jin opened the packet. It was not from the Crethern Unity. It was from an individual. The identifier was simply Day, former logistics officer, 3rd Wing. The message was text only. It read, "Thank you for the stories. We are reading them now." The one about the rabbit and the turtle was illogical. The turtle should never have won. And yet, we are learning. Jin showed it to Hannah. The old ambassador smiled, a real smile this time touching her eyes. "A conversation," she said. "It begins with a single word. Even if that word is blunder." Jin nodded. He drafted a reply, a simple one. He attached a single file, a collection of stories, not just of war, but of farming, of building, of love, of loss. He sent it back to Day's identifier, across the galaxy, on a Crethan world, in a small, plain chamber. Day received the reply. He was no longer in the military. The very structure was undergoing what was being called the reanalysis. He opened the file. He began to read a story about a man planting a tree whose shade he knew he would never sit under. The concept was staggering. It was an act of faith in a future one would not see. It was irrational. It was beautiful. He looked out at his ordered world, now humming with uneasy, thrilling questions. The human message had been a shockwave, cracking the frozen ground of their certainty. Now something new was growing in the cracks. It was fragile. It was terrifying, and it was alive. The war was over. The final message had been sent, received, and understood. But its echo, the human echo of chaotic, creative, stubborn hope, would now reverberate forever in the halls of the Crethan mind and in the silent, watchful chambers of the Galactic Council. They had learned what humanity was. They were the story that never ends.